Ashley Wilson is the name of a woman who is the parent to Podrick, her pet chihuahua. She recently wrote an article on the website uplift.com, and she opened it by saying how it is often said that our pets have similar personality traits as their owners. Now, admittedly, it is more a tongue-in-cheek kind of theory more than anything else, and it's clearly based on how the outside world sees our pets. But for example, you might hear it said that somebody with a golden retriever, for example, is a happy-go-lucky kind of person, or people with cats. They may be more sophisticated or independent, and so on and so forth. Well, as Ms. Wilson contemplated this theory of similar personality traits as it might pertain to little Podrick and her, she felt a little bit uneasy. And she wrote, "I don't see myself as a particularly aggressive person, while my bite-sized pup, Podrick, will attempt to devour anyone who does not meet his approval. This ranges from the postman, to my previous love interests, to innocent babies. Young children wail in terror, and full-grown men jump high in the air in horror. It really does not look good for us. Yet, as anyone who has been close to an animal will know, the personality that is shown to the world is only the surface level compared to what is conveyed to those in their pack. What most people don't see is the way his gentle soul stares into mine as he rests his head in my lap and gazes into my eyes. How he brings me his oh-so-stinky toy when I'm upset, and how he gently and protectively lays on me when I am unwell. To the world, his shady side is on show, while the light clearly shines bright inside and privately. Perhaps I'm the flip side to Podrick. I show the light to the world, while keeping the shadows hidden away, close to home. A sneaky move, perhaps unconscious, until now." And with that, Ms. Wilson went on to share a bit of the personal work that she has done to become conscious and aware of the shadows in her that she had been keeping hidden. Parts of her that she did not allow to be seen by the world, parts of her that once acknowledged and worked with, brought her a sense of newfound freedom and hope and power. So this dance between the light and the shadow in us, this is our focus for today. Now, there are any number of ways that you could define one's shadow. So much has been written about it, so many lessons and workshops available to attend and books to read. But one way to think of it is to see the shadow as referring to everything within ourselves that we don't know about ourselves. Some will refer to it at times as our disowned self. Franciscan Richard Rohr compares it to the scriptural teaching from Jesus in Matthew's Gospel, the one that says that we can so easily see the splinter in someone else's eye and completely ignore the log that's in our own. And in that scenario, the log in our own eye is our shadow, which is what we should be focused on, instead of paying so much attention to somebody else and what we think are their issues. And then one description of our shadow that I think I've heard more often than not is that it's any part of ourselves that we try to hide or deny because it seems socially unacceptable. Now, however you wish to define it, the one truth that you will find in all of the teachings is that we all have shadow sides to us, just as we all have light within us. And we also each have natural tendencies to each side of that spectrum. There's a test that was created by psychologist Scott Barry Kaufman, and he calls it the dark and light triad test. And he offered that each side is made up of three elements. On the dark side, our shadow side, you'll find the elements of entitled self-importance, callousness and cynicism, and strategic exploitation and deceit. On the light side, the elements are believing in the fundamental goodness of humans, valuing the dignity and worth of each and every human being, and treating people as ends themselves, not as a means to an end. Now, given a choice, and let's all be honest here, which side do you think you would rather prefer to spend your time focusing on? And which side would you maybe prefer to ignore or hide or deny? Well, there is some good news from Dr. Kaufman's work. What he has found is that most people's tendencies are much more heavily weighted towards the light. Now, if you have done any shadow work in your own life, or just read about it perhaps, you know that it can often be quite difficult. It can be very discomforting and uncomfortable. It's something that usually will take a fair degree of courage and commitment and time and really concerted effort to move through. And I think the main reason for these things is that we have spent years learning how not to do the work. Years learning how to keep that part of who we are buried. Going back to Richard Rohr, he wrote about our shadow, and he posted, 3 sources that he saw as being those which have helped get us to where we are in terms of not embracing our shadow sides, and where we can look for some new direction. And those 3 sources were religion, media, and scripture. What he noted about religion and media together was that they have defined what they refer to as our quote-unquote sinful shadow by primarily focusing on 2 things, and that's sexuality and body issues. And he found that to be far too narrow of a definition of our shadow. What he sees as a much larger and much more profound shadow in Western individuals and Western culture is failure. See, failure is not something embraced by our culture. And yet it's what Richard calls the genius of Scripture. See, we live in a success-driven culture. And in that culture, things like failure or powerlessness or any forms of poverty and such, they're scorned. There is rarely a place for things like non-violence and weakness or even simplicity. Oftentimes, vulnerability is rejected and dominance becomes the goal. And yet, what does Scripture advocate? What does Scripture teach? Well, let's see. Blessed are the poor. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are the pure in heart. Blessed are the merciful. Blessed are the peacemakers. It teaches of Jesus sitting with people like prostitutes and tax collectors, citizens who were, culturally abhorred and denounced. And here Jesus is teaching everybody that they're the ones that are going to get into the kingdom of heaven long before any priest or religious elders would. See, he sang the praises of the culturally defined failures and actually saw them as being part of what Richard calls spiritual success. And so many of us, over the years, we have come to learn how to avoid the culturally defined failures of today. To avoid them, to hide them, we learn instead how to project these images that we're all together. We got it all together. Images of strength and security and success, and we start trying to convince ourselves of that, and that is what we put out there to the world. Now, I think that everyone here in this room today, we've had many awakenings over the course of our lives, and I do believe that there have been times that we have done the work and we have spent the time with our shadow selves. But I think that we've arrived at a place of new awakening. And I think it might be just another gift coming to us through the pandemic and the calls for various forms of reform that are going out, all around our country. Because we're waking up to some of the deepest feelings that we may have ever allowed ourselves to acknowledge, and many that have not been comfortable. Many that have been in that category of our not wanting to admit they even are present, not wanting to accept them as our own. And I say that because I have had several congregants share with me personally or within group settings that it has been difficult and challenging to stay grounded in spiritual teachings over these last several months. And that what's been taking over at times, if you will, are traits and thoughts and feelings and emotions that they're not all that happy to find existing within themselves. But that's the thing about the shadow. It's often hidden from our awareness. In a busy, non-stop world and a culture that measures success and happiness and fulfillment according to how much money you have or how many things you possess or how high on that career ladder you can climb or how much power you can wield. The shadow often goes unnoticed, unseen for long periods of time. But with the shutdowns and the restrictions and the constrictions that have been a part of our lives now for several months, we've slowed down enough to see these shadows much more easily. Their voices no longer have to rise above a din. They are being heard loud and clear. Perhaps for the first time, or perhaps just in new and more profound ways. But either way, they are telling us that in order for us to come to full consciousness, we are to befriend them. We are to work with them, learn from them, maybe even do a little shadow boxing with them. But the overall goal being to allow them to play the role they have come to play in guiding us towards the spiritual successes that Jesus taught. This is simply allowing ourselves to become who we are. And we cannot become all that we are if we ignore specific parts of ourselves. So we can't ignore our inner conflicts and contradictions and criticisms and then expect to fully grow into the fullness of who we are. Part of that growth, part of continually breaking into higher levels of consciousness comes from the struggles that exist with our shadow self, the struggles that exist with what we would define as failures, and the struggles that come from the hurts and the wounds that we have sustained. Only when we embrace this part of our growth, along with all of the light, that's when we live in greater alignment with that capital T truth of ourselves. Something we might call our sacred selves, or just call love, but put that capital L on that word. Or we would refer to it as well as the Christ. And this may be the most important point to remember as we work with our shadow sides, and that is that this sacred part of us, this light of spirit in us, it's the very thing that provides the courage that we need, the strength that we need to go as deep within ourselves as is necessary in order to meet our shadow and begin the conversations. And if we view that sacredness as love, well, shoot, that's what's going to be with us no matter what we may find. And this sacredness is also that inner voice that's always reminding us to become who we are, and not halfway, to become all that we are. Psychologist Carl Jung had a great way of viewing this. He did a little bit of a spin on the phrase death wish. And he said that moving towards this kind of growth that we're talking about today, he says that's moving towards the life wish. He said the life wish teaches us not to fragment, splinter, or split, but to integrate and learn from everything. He said the God archetype is quite simply love at work. Love at work, calling us toward even deeper union with our own true selves, with others, and with God. So we make the process of this inner work holy. We look at life and all of it, all of life, as holy. Early in the lesson, I mentioned the sinful shadow taught by many religious traditions. And I'm sure that most of you know that we don't view sin or the idea of sin that way. We view it as a belief or a thought we may have in thinking that we could ever be separated from spirit. So as we step into this holy work at hand, we want to remember that the shadow is not sinful. It's not even the problem. The problem is the separation that exists with parts of ourselves. I mean, from an early age, we all learn about good and bad, right? I mean, from a very early age, we're being taught about what's good and what's bad. And to a very large degree, that is really important. It's a really important thing as it applies to having any sense of civil behavior and order in life. However, we also start to learn how to apply those good and bad labels to ourselves. And while we love the good things we see, we can come to really despise the bad things that we see. And because the outside world, because the culture tends to shun us when the bad shows up, well, then we just don't let it be seen. And a really interesting thing here is that sometimes what we choose to ignore and hide and deny within ourselves are some of the very best characteristics that could come forth from us and be expressed in our lives. For example, we can consider a calling in one's life. Consider my call to ministry. For months after clearly hearing that call, the only person who knew about it was my minister at that time. I kept it hidden from my children. I kept it hidden from my family and my coworkers and my friends. And why did I keep that hidden? Because I was afraid of the reactions from out there. Would I be shunned, rejected, or mocked and ridiculed? Would I be judged critically? Would I be culturally accepted or rejected? Now the thing is, whatever finds its way into the shadow aspect of ourselves, it's not going to go away just because we put it there. It's still there. It's joining with a collection of whatever else that we've hidden in those darker corners of our personalities. Now for myself, in this one example, my calling remained too strong to ignore. And its strength gave me the strength to bring it out of hiding. And when I did, doggone it, I did experience almost every one of those negative reactions that I mentioned before from others in my life. And it hurt. It hurt me deeply. And I struggled with that. And I expressed a few of my own more negative reactions, in return. But I soon came to find that the uncomfortable experiences that I was having were really shining a light on elements of my shadow side. The criticisms were exposing some of those inner conflicts and contradictions, having tugs of war inside of me, such as learned beliefs versus heartfelt beliefs, being silent, not asking questions versus sharing my voice and opinions, not being good enough versus seeing great value and worth and gifts to share. And I also came to understand that the strong reaction I had to some of what was being offered to me by others was because of the presence of those very same characteristics in me. Criticism and judgment and devaluation that I had long been rendering upon myself. And when I was able to learn all of this about myself from them and learn what it had taken to arrive at this new level of consciousness and awareness for me, it was so easy to see that all of the others in my life are on similar journeys. Now, I don't know if the way our lives intersected in this one situation helped them at all with any shadow work they might wanted to have done, but I sure know that it worked for me, and I'm forever grateful for what those people did. So sometimes one of the quickest ways to begin your shadow work and to identify your shadows is to pay attention to your emotional reactions to other people and towards other people. It'll help train yourself to more quickly see your shadow in the moment, and then later in the day, take the time to just reflect upon the interaction and what it was about it that bothered you so much. Because it often turns out to be a part of you that you have separated from and is wanting to just get reintegrated and reconnected with the fullness of you. Author J.K. Rowling has said that we've all got both light and dark inside us. What matters is the part we choose to act on. That's who we really are. Well, I think our choices can only be made once we have fully connected both the light and the dark. I think they serve to bring balance to us and really help us to make the most enlightened decisions we can and to take the best actions that we can. In Richard Rohr's writing, he referenced a psychotherapist who had followed the teachings of Carl Jung. And his name is Robert Johnson. And he put it this way. He said, each of us can pick up our own dark side, combine it with some hard-earned light, and make something better of it all. Make something better than the opposition of the two. Rohr noted that there is a certain kind of spiritual maturity, a spiritual maturity that can be experienced when we become aware that we are presenting, a persona or some sort of mask out to the world that is not the truth of who we are. That this spiritual maturity, can be experienced when we are humble enough and intentional enough about identifying and embracing our shadows and doing all of these things without assessing guilt or blame or shame upon ourselves. And I think it's a level of maturity that if we continue to do the work, it will continue to grow and it will continue to support us in maintaining a healthy balance between what is our shadow and our light sides. But I did mention that the work isn't always easy to do, so just in case any of us hit a bump or two in the road ahead as we go forward, let's all remember little Podrick. Okay, let's just always call to mind little Podrick, because after his mom, Ashley, had spent a good bit of time working on her own shadow self, he was once again out on a walk with her. And as soon as they came upon some young children, who Ashley referred to as his arch nemesis, she wrote, his body began to quiver with pent-up emotion, a growl released from between his bared teeth. But then something different happened. As I braced myself to take control of the situation, he turned and looked nonchalantly away, and we continued peacefully on our walk. Just as I am trying to be the very, very best version of myself, I realized so is he. My friends, if Podrick can do it, I have great faith that so can we. God bless you.